Chris Landry, hats off to you. I have not been able to listen to the Auburn podcast that you posted yesterday, but I really enjoyed the Alabama podcast. I hope you're doing well, Chris.
I'm doing well, Ryan. Good to be with you again.
Absolutely. And, I do want to kind of give a little bit of a tease to make the audience go there and listen to the podcast, but sort of help us. Why did you come up with this idea and sort of to go and sort of walk through Alabama's offense? Because here in Tuscaloosa, there's a lot of complaining going on with offense, really not where they thought it would be, but the podcast gave us a lot of insight of where they'd like to be as they sort of introduce this pro style back in.
Well, I think a lot of it is, it's topical. Alabama, obviously the best team in the country, and yet, I think this past week, it's like a revelation. It's like some of the people in the national media decided, Alabama's really the best team in the country, as if they just came out of the clouds in the last week. They've been the best team in the country all year long, and I think football people saw the difference between, say, Alabama and, say, Clemson. And listen, it's not about predicting the future. It's just evaluating what is on film. And a lot of it is, hey, but I don't know, this offense is this and that. And listen, I'm going to tell you that I don't think Alabama's played the best ball yet. I think that there's room for improvement. In fact, a lot of it, and we can get into that at days and weeks to come or weeks to come. But I think part of it was, hey, a lot of questions that I get is, well, their offense, can they do this, can they do that? And what I've basically tried to explain exactly what they're trying to do with the offense and why it's not perfect, and there's always the challenge to get better and better. It is, by design, along schematically what they really want to do with the offense. And I do think they want to do more with the passing game, but part of the podcast, the design was to explain why I think they got into a little bit of trouble last year, and while they got away a little bit from their identity. And listen, Clemson deserves a lot of credit. Deshaun Watson's proven at the NFL level how great he was, and without him it doesn't happen. But I still think that Alabama, their problems towards the end of the season can be traced back to losing a little bit of their identity. So I went back to explain that, and because I think a lot of people just tend to gloss over things. And, obviously as a scout and doing my consulting work, we really forced by design to dig into the whys. And, you guys are familiar with the term, the process. That is really important because it's the evaluation of the process that determines and creates the result, not the result, defining the process. So I think that it was topical because of who it is, Alabama, and why this may be a little bit different look to it, even though it may not look a whole lot different to maybe the untrained eye.
Well, Alabama is one of those teams, and I think you emphasized this, of getting back to the point of attack and allowing their offensive line to be a lot more physical. They're the seventh best rushing team in the country. They're at the top in the SEC. They average over 302 yards per game. Let me ask you, from opening that up, when you're able to rush the football with that type of success, you see teams that are loading up and trying to prevent Alabama from doing it, and almost looks like they're trying to dare them to throw the football.
There's no question about it. And the more the ability at the line of scrimmage to control the game is where, from an offensive standpoint, you dictate to a defense. Now, there are different styles. When Spurrier was at Florida, he dictated a lot in the passing game, but if you go back and study his teams, people tend to forget. They think fun and gun and scoring 50 points, but they forget how good they were running the football. And I think that that was a little bit of a different design. What this offense is they're going to dictate and force the defense to overplay the run. That's when the pass game becomes a little bit easier to throw against, and it's a safer throw. You're throwing it into less numbers, into coverage. So it creates more big play opportunities. I think they're taking advantage of big play opportunities, but they're prudent with it. I think what people want to see is something that really they're not going to see. They want to see them line up four wides, and just to show that they can do it, throw the football, spread it around dink and dong, and be up-tempo. Well, that's not what they're going to do. And quite frankly, if that's what they did, they wouldn't be very good at it. That's not their identity, and that would bring in, quite frankly, a lesser opponent into a game. I think their play design, as well as just their overall offensive philosophy, is about being able to control the line of scrimmage, dominating your opponent, depth at running back, hitting it downhill, and then obviously taking advantage in the passing game. It's not about a resistance to throw the football, but how and when you throw the football that's most important. And I think when you get away from being able to attack that, that's an issue. Yes, people, and I think better teams in the country that potentially that they might play, be it a Georgia or maybe a Clemson, they will have more ability to slow down Alabama than anybody that they've played thus far has. And, you know, the ability to be able to make plays in the passing game is something that they're going to have to need to do more. But, again, the ability to run the football is still going to be a challenge for those teams against this Alabama front because they're so very good at it. And the commitment of having to overpopulate the box to defend the run is going to create opportunities in the passing game. They're just not really in a position to where they feel like they need to do things in a more aesthetically pleasing form. Their mantra is they want to be able to dominate in the trenches so that they can dictate to the defense how the game is going to be played on offense and not take what the defense gives them, but in essence force the defense into a look that they want, and then they'll take advantage of that. That's what the whole offensive philosophy behind what they wanted to do this off season and into this season is all about. And they're not happy, quite frankly, that they've done it as well as they'd like to do it. They're still in a growth process, which is why I get this a lot nationally. People ask me because they know my relationship with Nick. Why is he not happy? Why he looks like a grouch? And yeah. Well, the whole point is every moment is a teaching moment for him. And so, if you're beating somebody up by 30 points, it is important that you play with good technique in all three phases of the game, because when it comes time to where it is a close game, you have to be able to be focused and ready to perform at that moment. And if you don't perform in a game where you've got a 35-point lead, well, I realize nobody in the stands and nobody in the media could care less, but if you start to do that, you develop bad habits. And all of a sudden, then when you try to do things differently in a critical moment, you're not as conditioned to do it because you've become a little bit lax in focusing on the details. So that's why he always says every play has to be played like it's a life in a game in and of itself. So if you're winning by 40 and you've got the last 4 minutes of the game and you lose the last 4 minutes of the game because you don't do it correctly, then you failed in those last 4 minutes. And this is what we've got to correct. That's how he approaches it. And that's why I think that they played to a level that is a different standard, and it is not about margin of victory. It's about a margin of success on each and every opportunity and every play.
How much do you think that Nick Saban wanted to go back to this type of offense where the time of possession, it's not where it needs to be, but they've almost improved? Like they were 48th in the country last year. They're now at 24. So they've improved significantly when we talk about time of possession and not wearing your defense out on that side of the football.
Oh, I think it's significant. Remember, the philosophy of being able to build championships and the consistency of which he's been able to do it is built on great defense. And, great defense at any level, it travels well. It bad weather, good weather, home, road, early season, mid-season, late season, big stadium, small stadium. Whatever it does, there's no different variable of it. It's kind of like, to use a basketball analogy, you get these great shooting teams and maybe they go in a big gym and they lose their time. Well, it's none of that. We're going to be more physical. We're going to stop you, and we're going to force you into submission on that side of the ball. And then we're going to run the football on offense, and we're going to kind of compress that game to where we will, if not eliminate, we will significantly decrease any chances of you having success against us because we've recruited better than you, we've developed better than you, so we're not going to allow you an opportunity to get in the game, as opposed to a team like Clemson who does things similarly in terms of talent, but if you watch them play, they are a little bit more undisciplined, more loose ends. They play up and down to the level of their competition, so when they struggle against a BC, nobody cares about it because they win. Well, you do that enough, but guess what? You end up losing to Syracuse on the road when nobody expects you to. Well, that seed was planted for a while, and so he doesn't ever want that to be seeded. So I think that being able to be dominant defensively and with the running game on offense is always the mantra of how he wants to build his team, with the idea that you're going to have to be efficient in the passing game. You're going to have to make plays in the passing game because there might be teams that can do a better job at the highest level to slow down your run. So how are you going to be able to beat them then? But not to the point where he wants to abandon and become a passing team to where he's doing maybe some of the things that others are doing, because if you did that, if you got, for example, in a matchup where a shootout matchup against an Ole Miss, this Alabama team, consider this for a second. If you decided we're going to play it kind of the way Ole Miss plays it, well, you would take an Ole Miss team that is far inferior and give them a much better chance to be competitive in the game than you would in playing your way. It's like you're going to play our style of football. We're not going to play your style. We're going to force you to adjust. We're not going to adjust to you. And I think that's the way, in the reason why he has wanted to get back to it. I think to some degree he lost that identity just a touch last year, and I say just a touch because it's not like they lost 3 games and had a disappointing year. They only got to the championship game and lost it on the last play or two.
But, Chris, I'm going to tell you the Alabama concern, okay? And this is from an Alabama perspective. I feel like that we're the barometer for Alabama fans here in Tuscaloosa. 4 hours a day. We're a caller-friendly show, take a lot of phone calls. And let me just sort of maybe try to paraphrase what their concerns are. They're seeing a lot of repeat from last year, that when we talk about the passing game has not been developed as quick as what they're seeing. And I know you see it from a different perspective. That's why I'm asking you the question. Their concern is, let's say that you get to the end of November, when you take on Auburn, you take on Georgia, you take on some teams that can slow down your rushing attack. Is there going to be enough of that passing game developed that Alabama can go, okay, you stop the run, we'll throw it on you? Do you see that beginning to take some steps where that will not duplicate last year or repeat last year?
Yes, I do. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I see a much more confident Jalen Hurts. People will look at the results and throws. What I see is a guy that sees the field a lot better. I think we tend to forget how young this kid was and how inexperienced, and quite frankly, to some degree, just kind of flying by the seat of his pants and trying to coach him into understanding things that he had not been exposed to before. The game is starting to slow down from him a little bit. And I would say, and I guess my point is the opposite of what I think people are thinking that's happening. People think they lost the championship game last year or didn't win the championship, just leave it at that, because they couldn't throw the football well enough. They lost because they couldn't establish the line of scrimmage and control the football with a lead well enough, in my view, and in the view of, I think, that coaching staff. That's where they lost it. They lost it by giving a player of Deshaun Watson's caliber and his teammates around him more opportunities and more opportunities and more opportunities against their own defense, which was great, but on the field for 90-plus snaps. That's where the game was lost, I think. And, yes, they scored, did Alabama, late to take the lead and what a lot of people thought was to win the game. But, again, the inability before that to compress that game, control it at the line of scrimmage where they felt they could have done it. In essence, they weren't physical enough, and teams did not have to overplay the run enough, therefore making it a little bit easier for them to defend Alabama. So there are two things that I think need to keep in mind that are different, in my view. One, their ability to control the line of scrimmage better than they did before, meaning teams are going to have to overplay the run with numbers even more. And when you do that, it creates more spacing and coverage in which to be able to make plays in the passing game. And two, the ability of the quarterback, who is getting better and more comfortable with passing game concepts, to be able to make plays when he has to. I think last year they were going in with the idea that they needed to be able to get as much out of a young quarterback, that there is no substitute for experience, Ryan. And I think the young man did a phenomenal job, but there are just certain things that you don't know until you go through the fires enough, and I think he's been through it enough to make a difference. That's where I see the difference. And I understand that people want to see more of this and less of that to create their comfort level. And what I'm saying is, I don't think you're going to see more of what you want. I think you're going to see some of it, but I think what you're going to see is more of what they feel they need to do to control the game and dominate the game. And that's where I think they fell short, and they're tied together. In essence, the ability to throw it is directly correlated to the ability to dominate with the run and force the defense to overcommit to the run. That's going to create more big play opportunities in the passing game. And I think if they don't control the line of scrimmage, they don't run it as well, they don't force the defenses to overplay it, then I think they could be in trouble. I think that if they do those things, then I think you're going to see them be able to execute as functionally as they need to the other aspects of the game that I think fans at this point are a little bit more concerned about.
Chris Landry, LandryFootball.com. Chris, we'll pause here. We're going to come back. We'll talk about the SEC. I want to get your thoughts on some things that happened this past weekend in the Southeastern Conference and where we go from here. Certainly, we'll talk about Tennessee and what you see from the Volunteers. We're talking to Chris Landry. It is LandryFootball.com. We've been talking about a podcast that he does each and every Tuesday and Thursday. It is a free download right there on his website, LandryFootball.com. There's a lot of things that are behind the wall, a lot of inside information, football views from an administrator, a coach, and a guy that understands it from a scouting perspective. Chris Landry joins us each and every Wednesday at 4 o'clock. LandryFootball.com. We'll move forward. We'll ask him about the SEC. Coming up next, right here on The Game in Tuscaloosa and Tide 102.9, 100.9 of the all-new Tide 102.9 app.
The Game with Ryan Fowler.
Chris, I hope you're doing well. Welcome into The Game in T-Town. Let me ask you about Auburn's offense. What do you see?
Not much. Kind of painful to watch. Even against Mercer, their identity is a little bit of a struggle. While Jared Stidham has got mobility, he's not really fit to run Gus's offense, and I think they're trying to modify it, and it's hard with Gus being involved in it. It's different. You're trying to marry two offenses, and it's kind of like two chefs trying to make a meal, and you just got a blend of ingredients, and it's not tasting real well at this point. They're running a pretty good defense. They've got to get healthy in the running game, and they've got to be able to establish the run. They should be able to throw the football a little bit more effectively than they do, but a lot of it has to do with their route concepts, which are poor and not a byproduct of Chip Lindsey and certainly in his past. And I think it's a little bit of a mess at this point, and I'm very curious to see how they progress. We got some teams, Brian, with Florida trying to find an offense. You got Auburn in their travails. You've got LSU trying to find themselves. You got Tennessee in their situation. You got A&M and Arkansas, and there's a lot of heat on both of those coaches. You got Missouri that's dead man walking. I mean, it's a mess in the SEC outside of obviously Alabama, and I think Georgia is certainly well coached and on pace, and Mississippi State is steady as she goes with how they run that program. And I guess you can say things are looking up for Vandy, South Carolina, and Kentucky in terms of achieving what those level of programs normally achieve, but everybody else is kind of in a mess when you think about it.
The Game with Ryan Fowler, weekday afternoons from 2 until 6.
Download it. It's not yesterday's podcast. It's last Thursday, but I promise you, it will be the most informative 20 minutes of Alabama offensive helping. It really, Chris, I'm telling you, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the air, but listening to it where I could even go back and connect, it helped me do my job better because it makes me understand where Alabama's going on the offensive attack. I'm telling you, it was an A+, 10 out of 10 podcast.
Well, appreciate that, and that's what we aim to do and try to provide that, and we have a different way to kind of approach it every week. We had something on LSU a couple of weeks ago, had something on Tuesday about Auburn and kind of their collapse this past Saturday, and we'll have something. We've got something coming up tomorrow, kind of the dysfunction in the Cleveland Browns front office, and we're going to have something on in details of why all the talk about like a guy like John Gruden, and everyone thinks he's the apple of everybody's eye, why he, knowing him very well and respecting him and calling him a friend, why he would not be a good college coach. And so we try to attack something different that maybe takes people inside a story, a theme, an idea, but also we like to package it in front of some other X's and O's stuff that we uncover inside the film room, breaking down the college and NFL game.
Well, I don't think anybody saw the Syracuse game with the way that it went out, but you did mention in that podcast, you talked about the Syracuse coach, I believe it's pronounced Dino Babers. Is it?
Dino Babers. Yeah,
and you pointed out in that podcast, you said, I think this game is going to be closer than most people think.
Well, and the reason is because the way Clemson has played throughout this season, and they did it last year as well. If you remember, they got really outplayed by North Carolina State. North Carolina State missed a chip shot field goal, and then they turned around and did Clemson and lost to Pittsburgh. And this past year, a couple of weeks ago, that Boston College score looked like, if you didn't watch the game, looked like, just Clemson rolled again. Well, they didn't. It was 7-7 midway through the fourth quarter, and they struggled. And so that a lot of those loose ends that I talk about, their ability to play up and down to the level of competition has been there with this team this year. And so get the quarterback not healthy in the game, can't run the football. You got a Syracuse team that got beaten by this Clemson team by 50-plus last year. They were ready to play. Clemson wasn't. They got punched in the mouth, kind of just felt like, hey, we're going to get it. Eventually we're going to get it. And before you know it, you're in a ball game. And you're in a ball game with somebody that's getting more and more confident, and you end up and you turn around and you lose the game. And that's, again, for a Clemson team that's very talented, and I think, it was a very good team and in an elite program. That's a consistent issue. I see that a lot with USC as well, by the way. USC's just not as good as Clemson, but I see some of those loose ends that struggle. As good as I think Dabo Swinney is, I think his teams are not as well focused on a consistent basis as I think he'd like them to be, and quite frankly, the way they should be.
Chris, let me go into the other conversation of talking about Auburn and LSU. I guess you could say what happened for the Auburn Tigers, but what went right for the LSU Tigers down in Baton Rouge?
Well, in breaking down the tape and watching it live, it was pretty clear. And talking with the Auburn coaches last week, they had a vision of how to go about game planning against LSU, and it was a good one. They defensively, LSU's offense had really no answer for Auburn's defense. I thought Matt Canada did a really good job of milking a couple of trick plays into some points or in a position to get some points, but they couldn't line up and move the football against Auburn to save their life. On the other side of the ball, Auburn was moving it at will against this LSU defensive front, which is not as formidable as they've been in the past. They were very effective, controlled the game, and I thought we're on the verge of wearing out this LSU defense and maybe getting, a 45-13 type of win coming out of Tiger Stadium. Well, it didn't happen that way, as we all know. With a 20-0 lead, start to be some loose ends, gave up a couple of big plays. Okay, you had a chance to get an interception at the end of the first half. You drop it, and all of a sudden LSU throws a touchdown pass. And okay, so now it's a little bit of a game, but then Auburn's still in control. What was inexplicable to me and was the focus of the podcast, and I go into great detail on yesterday's podcast that's up on LandryFootball.com, is that the Auburn coaches, offensive coaches, did first of all, let's look at what LSU did. They did a good job of putting an extra safety in the box to stop the run, and they employed some run blitzes, which, they needed to do because they could not line up and head up, play this Auburn run game. So the clear thing that I thought was coming next was Auburn was going to take advantage of the huge voids in the middle of the field in the intermediate passing game that they really had an advantage to attack LSU. They didn't do that. They continued to run the football. They continued to go with vertical shots off play action against LSU's corners, which was really not a high percentage play to be throwing 50-50 balls against those corners. So it was a real ill-advised game plan, and one that I kept waiting for them to figure it out, and they never did. So LSU gradually gets back in. They still can't score enough points, but they get a punt return for a touchdown. Then all of a sudden, it's a game, and then Auburn's offense is out of rhythm. So that's, really what happened in the game, and the inability to adjust to that. I think they got a little bit of a comfort feeling that they could run the football regardless what LSU did defensively, and I think they missed the boat. I thought they had some success on some short passes in the intermediate, the curl and the flat areas in the first half. They had them the entire second half and choose to not do that. And I thought that all they needed was maybe one more touchdown and a bunch of first downs, and they could have salted that game away in the second half relatively stress-free. Instead, the coaches were distraught on Sunday and feel like that may very well cost them their jobs at the end of the year, because this was definitely more about what Auburn didn't do than what LSU did. To give LSU credit for not giving up, but this was a game in which Auburn was clearly the better team and were clearly outcoached.
Chris, is Georgia here to stay? Do you see this team making it through? Because you look at their schedule, they've got to beat Auburn on the road, and looks like it's almost a lock to go to Atlanta.
I think they are here to stay. Time will tell. I think they're a really good team. Now, I think as a program, they're definitely here to stay. I think that what Kirby is doing is building it in the mold and in the vision of what he was a part of at Alabama. And I think that the way he's recruiting, which, by the way, is second to none. I mean, he's doing things that only they're doing in Tuscaloosa, and getting player after player after player. I think he's ahead of schedule. I think this offensive line is young. I think he's got one of the best line coaches in the country, and they've gradually gotten better. I think there's a huge drop-off, Ryan, between Alabama and the rest of the country. I really do. I think you draw Alabama on the line, and I think who's the second-best team? Well, I think you can make a case for a few. For me, the film clearly says to this point it's Georgia. They did not play well last week against Missouri in the first half, but they quickly adjusted and dominated the game in the second. I think the defense is fast, it's athletic. I think the run fits are outstanding. I think they do a great job in coverage, and I think they run the football very well. I think maybe the difference is they don't have as much ability to make as many plays on offense from the quarterback position as, say, Alabama, who can make plays running and throwing from the quarterback position, and they can put more stress on defenses than maybe this Georgia offense can. But it's a really good team, and right now at least they are a better team on film than I see Penn State, Ohio State. Now, is it going to be that way in 2 or 3 weeks? Well, ask me then. As more games that are played with greater impact, we learn more about these teams each week. But I think this Georgia team is really good, and as a program, they're definitely here to stay. They're the program of the future in this conference on the East side, certainly.
Chris, I don't understand it. You're an NFL guy that understands the draft and going through the process. As I look at Tennessee and I began to look at the talent, I mean, you live in that state. Alvin Kamara, running back there at the Saints. They've had talent. Derek Barnett, a great player last year. And I know you cannot build a team around 2 or 3 guys, but, I mean, they had Joshua Dobbs last year. I know they went some injuries. But as I look, it just doesn't match up. What's happening wrong? What's going wrong in Knoxville where they haven't even had a winning SEC record and Lord knows when?
It's been over 10 years they haven't had a winning record in the SEC. Think about that for a second. A decade. And we're not talking about, doing it in a loaded East. The East has been very winnable the past few years, and you don't even have a winning record in the East. That says a lot. pure and simple, they've done a very poor job of developing players on their team and transferring it to Saturday. Now, the one thing he has done well is he has built a roster, and he's recruited very well, something his predecessors did not do. So the program's in better shape in terms of a program. But on-field coaching has been a major problem. I thought they missed the boat the past couple of years. I didn't think this team was going to be that good this year. And unfortunately for him, what he's going to pay for with his job is the sins of the past couple of years where he should have won the East more than likely, and he failed to do so. And so now there is no excuse in his fifth year. And when you line up and you get just hammered by Georgia, when Georgia is in the second year of their coach and you're in the fifth year and you're not even competitive with Georgia, that's where I think the final nail is in the coffin. And in short, it really comes down to the inability to develop players. And while there have been players that have been successful coming out under his tenure, is putting them in a position, the play sequence in offense in the red zone, very curious, very unkept, very disorganized. They were awful last week in the red zone. They had every chance to be able to win that game last week. They could match up with South Carolina, but they can't get anything done in the red zone. Why is that? Play sequence, play design were very flawed on that side of the ball. They've got an outstanding running back. To me, it's not about competing with Alabama. They're way behind them. A lot of people are, but when you are just not keeping strides and you're getting out-coached on a regular basis by South Carolina, and it's the fifth year, that's where everyone is fit to be tied in Knoxville.
Well, Chris, I'm going to ask you this final question, and I'm going to let you go. I always enjoy the conversation. LandryFootball.com. But, Chris, you pointed out on that podcast that these teams that these coaches that are traditional football minds, like yourself, like Nick Saban and others, they don't like the direction of where the offense is going. But sometimes you got to go places where you don't want to go. And I think that's a credit to the coaches that are able to change and sort of stay one step ahead in this evolution of the current game that we live in.
Amen. And it's why Nick kind of reached out of his comfort zone, and he tapped into some of the stuff that Lane Kiffin was doing, and why people said, wow, what a personality mismatch. Well, it was. But he tapped into something that intrigued him, and he knew that was the future. He knew that it was something that was giving his defense trouble, and the rules were going to make it favorable for other teams to do it. So why not create some of those problems for other defenses in your own right? And that's why we're seeing a Jalen Hurts. I mean, prior to that, in the other championships, we haven't seen that type of dual-threat quarterback at Alabama. It is the future. It is the ability to be able to make plays in both the pass and run game that is paramount, and that is what you have to do. You have to push yourself to try to get better, and that's why I think he's been ultra successful, is that he's kind of playing to his own standard, and let's try to get better. And, people just think, well, if you win a championship, you can't get better. Well, baloney. If you don't get better, you're not going to win any more championships, and that's why he's been able to do it repeatedly.
Chris Landry, LandryFootball.com. Hey, Chris, talk about the website and tell people how they can get more information. I know we're not able to cover everything in 33 minutes, but I'd love for you to invite the folks to your website.
Well, LandryFootball.com is we feel a unique website because we take the fan inside the film room. We explain the game. We explain what the college teams, the pro teams, what are they doing, team by team. What's the inside scoop of what's going on? What does the film say about their players, their teams, their coaches, their schemes? So that's what we do for you. We've got a lot of free information on there, but we've got a premium section that if you're a real hardcore fan or you want to become one and learn more about the game, we're going to bring you that side of it, and it's very, very affordable. You got a monthly $9.99 a month. We've got a package for 3 months, and it's even cheaper, and then 6 months it's even cheaper than that, and for 12 months it's even cheaper than that. So you get an opportunity and a good bargain to really learn the game, whether it's recruiting, the draft, in season, out of season. We take you and basically give you access to a coaching and scouting department for less than a magazine subscription. So it was born out of Landry Football Operations, which is a consulting firm for doing the coaching and scouting consulting for teams NFL teams and college programs. So we decided can we give something for the fan that's maybe not quite as in-depth, but something that they can use and enjoy. So that's what LandryFootball.com is all about. So check us out. You like football, you'll love LandryFootball.com.